Hello. So we covered kindness a little bit, and the second practice or concept, of course, is related to kindness, and that's generosity. So in this conversation, I'll briefly talk about, what is it? What is generosity? And how can it guide us and make us live a life which is not just beneficial to us, but is also useful to those around us. And I think generosity is one of those traits, one of those practices that can enable us to create a kind of life where our presence in the world is not just for ourselves, but it's a sharing of ourselves with others. Now, simply stated, generosity is a habit or a practice of sharing whatever we have with others. We often say so-and-so is generous, so-and-so practices generosity. But the funny thing is, when we think of generosity, we only think in terms of material transfers. Someone giving money to someone buying someone something, someone giving a gift to someone. Our idea of being generous is transactional. And I think that's a learned behavior. Because we exist in a society where things are either purchased or transferred and money is needed, we think that generosity always involves money, right? Or doing things with money for others, right? But generosity can have many faces. When you are taking time off to take care of a sibling or a parent, that is generosity of time and love, right? You're using the time that you could have otherwise used for yourself to take care of the others. That is being generous, right? When you volunteer at a soup kitchen, you volunteer at the local community center, that is a kind of generosity of your labor. You're giving it voluntarily for the betterment of others. If you're a teacher, you already know what is required of you in a classroom, right? What if a student reaches out to you, emails you and says, I can't meet on weekdays because I have to rush to work, but would you be free for 30 minutes on this weekend? I would like to talk to you about my prospects, about my future, about how I'm doing. Now, technically, you could basically say, hey, I'm sorry, I don't work on weekends. But, and I'm talking about college level adult students. But if you're generous, maybe you'll say, yeah, absolutely, let's meet on campus at the library or at a coffee house and we can go over your essay or your assignment, right? That is being generous. So what it then tells us is that when we do something for others without expecting a return, we are being generous. Now then that means is that we don't need a lot of money to be generous. We can just be who we are and use our time, our mind, and our body, and our words to be generous. When you reach out to encourage someone, you might not really know them or pay them a compliment. That's you being generous. And it starts a sort of chain reaction. It makes the other person feel better. And if they are feeling better and walking into the world, chances are that feeling automatically would transport to other people. They'll pass it on to others without even knowing it. So that's generosity. Now there is something that Paulo Freire, my favorite Brazilian education philosopher, calls false generosity. And it's important to understand that. And he's talking in systemic terms. According to Freire, false generosity is when Within a given dynamic of a society, there are people who belong to the dominant group, people who are part of the oppressed group, and where the dominant group just pick up the scraps from their table and give it to others without changing the system, and that is what Freire calls false generosity. The true generosity would be when you actually work with the people on things that benefit them, on things that change their lives, or on things that make the world a place where everyone can prosper. Right? And so that's a distinction that we all ought to make. You can apply it at the highest scale of rich nations giving charity to the poor nation, and individuals trying to give whatever they don't need to charities. Right? When you do that, it's not generosity because you're giving something that you don't need. True generosity would be when you give something that you yourself need. Right? And so generosity is connected to giving of your trust, of your love, of your labor, of your wealth, right? But giving something that you value, right? But a lot of people think like generosity is, a sideshow. It's not an integral part of who we are. And I learned this insight from Khalil Gibran, from the Prophet, where he teaches us that generosity is impulsive, it's imperative. Without it, we cannot be healthy human beings. And he uses this example, and I'm going to just rephrase it as I cite him. And he says, you say that you shall give to the deserving. The trees in your orchard say not so, nor the flocks in your pasture. They give, for they know that to withhold is to perish. I mean, this is an insight of brilliance. Because if you have been around farmers, around an orchard or something, you probably already know that if you don't take the fruit off of a fruit tree one year and trim it, the next year it will produce less fruit. And if you have been around farm milk animals or milk cows, you know that if you don't milk them every day, if they don't give of their milk, they will be in pain. So that's what he's talking about, that the animals in your pasture and the trees know genetically that to give is to live. Because if you don't, you'll be in pain and eventually suffer. So giving and generosity then aren't just things that we do as a supplement to ourselves. They are integral part of ourselves, right? And as I talked about kindness, right, how to become generous. We all start as children. We do things, we share things because our parents teach us to, right? Sometimes we don't like doing that, but we do it to please our parents. Then we realize that, if you want to be popular, share your things with other kids, right? So we do it performatively to be popular. There's a selfish end to it. But if you keep practicing it, all of these moral ways of living become part of who we are as we do them more and more. Because identity is performative, right? We become what we aspire to. And the reason we become what we aspire to is because when we are doing it just for performative reasons, there's always this doubt in our mind. We keep asking ourselves, well, this pleased them, but did I really mean it? And then eventually, imperceptibly, you start meaning it. Trust me, I mean, this is a life lesson I learned in my own life. I was first faking to be generous, faking to be kind, right? But then that became my reputation. And when that became my reputation, I filled the gap, right? To feel good about myself, I filled the gap and actually started believing in the things that I had started as a performance. So these are some of my thoughts on generosity. How useful it can be in the world, What is the distinction between false generosity and true generosity? A true generosity will try to change the system in which people have wants, right? And then that it is an imperative that when we perform a generous identity and eventually start living it, it makes us happier, it makes us better, and it makes us kinder, gentler, and well-liked, right? And sometimes it may not make much material sense, right? But remember, when you give the scraps off your table or things that you do not need, it still serves a purpose, but it's not really generosity. Generosity is when you give something to someone else, something that you value, that could be useful to you, something that you like, right? And something that you even might need. That is giving. That is true generosity. That's it for now. I'll probably come back with some more thoughts. Thank you so much, and I hope this brightens your day and makes you think about the world differently and makes you think about your own actions in the world and their significance in a different way. Thank you. Peace and love.